Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talking Technophobia in Film, where every film might as well be 1931's Frankenstein to me. You will not laugh, you will not cry, you will learn by the numbers. I am Professor Movies, and this is Full Metal Jacket. So I'd like to thank you all for joining us tonight as we do our third in our series of four film talks about the films of the film auteur Stanley Kubrick. Bonus points go to Private Big Daddy for recognizing the chat feature in our Zoom call and changing his name to a fun nickname a la Private Hartman. So thank you, Private Big Daddy. So a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. I've already mentioned the chat. You can locate the chat by going to the menu bar, and it should be probably at the bottom of your Zoom screen where it says chat, and you can communicate with me. You can ask a question, and like I said, that's where I gave that extra credit assignment while we were waiting to get started earlier. So again, I want to thank you all for coming. And again, if you'd like to change your Zoom name to some kind of fun nickname, like Private, maybe I don't know. I want to think that he'd call me Private Kubrick, but I know like that's giving myself way too much credit. So, like whatever you think, it might be. Feel free to change that if you want. All right, so we're going to get into things tonight. And before we do, I just want to remind you of LMC Media and the great opportunities it offers. Programs like Talking Technophobia in Film would not be possible without LMC Media. And I do encourage everyone to consider becoming a membership. Uh, so if you haven't already, right, that's something you should look into because again, right, that membership goes a long way. You give a lot and you get a lot out of it. All right, and you can do that by visiting lmcmedia.org. Okay, so we are talking about Full Metal Jacket tonight, and I have watched Full Metal Jacket probably way too many times than anyone ever needs to. But I got some ideas. I'm excited. A little gung ho. I'm feeling, if I can, use the expression. And here's a look at what we're going to be doing tonight. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my technophobia thing. What I see going on in this movie in terms of Kubrick and what he views in technology. But then I really want to break the movie down and think about what people often have problems with in this film, what they criticize about it. Um, there's a handful of Kubrick films that are held up as these great works of art, and movies like this and his last two films, this and Eyes Wide Shut, seem to not get much acclaim in that regard. So maybe we'll explore that a little tonight. I also want to talk about some of the positives with this movie, but also really the idea of representation and the idea of a war film in general and what a war film does or is supposed to do. Some of the big themes in this movie are masculinity, transformation, and duality. Duality, that Jungian thing. So we'll explore that a little bit because I think that's really one of the more like visible things, even upon first viewing, because the duality is definitely like mentioned even in the script. And then finally, I want to talk about kind of Kubrick in general as a filmmaker and how this movie fits into his filmography and in terms of like his message, his maturity. Um, and I'm titling that Kubrick's caricatures, and to give you a little insight about kind of like how I think Kubrick sees things and his movies. But we'll explore that. And as always, we're thinking about what this film says, not only about technology, but also what it says about film and culture in general, right? These movies, in a lot of ways, are mirrors for us and our culture and our beliefs and our fears. And that it definitely holds true, I think, in Full Metal Jacket. And then finally, I do want to remind you that you are muted, but when you raise your hand around question time, right, that's a signal to us in Zoom land that, oh, okay, you'd like to share something, and then we can go and unmute you and let you share. But if you don't raise your hand, I won't know. Something else you can do if you don't want to speak out loud, you could type stuff into the chat, and you can type up into the chat, and that may be a way for you to share your ideas as well. I'll try to check in on that every once in a while. I am going to try to quickly adjust the sound so I can hear. Let's see. Words, 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 words. Okay. I adjusted the volume a little bit. You guys let me know if That seems to help or not. So I'm trying. Okay. Introduction. Here's the stuff. Most of us are familiar with it. Most of us are familiar with it. Directed by Kubrick. You know, Kubrick wore many hats with this film. That's why we call him a film auteur. Based on a book, like most of Kubrick's works, this one's based on Gustav Hasford's book, The Short Timers. He has a sequel to it, if anybody's interested in seeing the further adventures of some of these characters. I forget the title. I'll try to look it up for you in a moment. Released August 26th, 1987. A cast that I think in today's day and age, right, they're big names and they carry a lot of weight, and we recognize many of them. But I think while Matthew Modine is definitely like intended to be our protagonist and the intended heart of this film, I think that the two standout characters are really Vincent D'Onofrio and Lee Ermey, right? Those characters that appear in the first half of the film. Some other things. Decent budget for the time. This was not a low budget film. This was pretty expensive. They saved money by shooting in London and blowing up buildings that were already marked for demolition. It was like a gas works. I think that was like a couple miles from where Kubrick lived, and it hadn't been used since World War I. So most of the urban Vietnam scenes are shot there. It went on to make some money. It received a lot of critical acclaim, but like most Kubrick films, the reception of this one is really split. So that's something that I hope we'll explore, right? I give it in the side, I said a war film in 2 acts. I don't know if it's two. I think I got a theory that it's three. You know, it follows a traditional 3-act structure, but maybe that's something we'll talk about. Full Metal Jacket is a reference to type of ammunition, right? Different types of bullets, right? Full Metal Jacket is a different bullet from a hollow point bullet. And we'll talk a little bit about that in general, hopefully, as well. This received some nominations, like for best screenplay, and ultimately this is his penultimate film. This is the second to last film that Stanley Kubrick gives us, and a lot of the work he was doing in preparation for his Holocaust film, based on the novel The Aryan Papers, kind of when that movie didn't happen because Kubrick saw Schindler's List. Some of those ideas, right, came into this movie and helped, you know, make this movie possible. Okay, so before I tell you what I think, I think we should address some of the elephants in the room. And the first thing is really the plethora of Vietnam War films that were released prior to this and after Full Metal Jacket. And I'm sure you've got like a favorite or at least one you like better than others. I will say that this movie comes out at a time at the end of a decade full of Vietnam films, full of great, critically acclaimed Vietnam films. But there's something Kubrickian about this movie, and hopefully we will explore that. But to start us off, we're going to do a warm-up question. So I guess what I'd like you to do all to start is, if you could locate the chat, and I'm using Zoom with my my high school students, so this is more practice for me than anything else. I'd like you guys to locate the chat feature, and I'd like you to write the best or your favorite war film, right? You don't have to tell me why, but I'm going to look at the chat and I'll read some of those examples out loud. I may ask a follow-up question, but I'd like you all to find it. Phantom Blopper, yes, that's right, is the sequel to Short Timers. I'd like you to type it in the chat and see if we can get some conversations started there. If you need help remembering movies about war or Vietnam specifically, you can take a look at some of that stuff on the screen. Braveheart. I often think that there are like two types of war movies set during and after World War I, and then war movies set before World War I. And depending on which category it falls into, you're going to get a very different kind of film. It seems like with the rise of modern warfare, war films changed. Paths of Glory is on my list to rewatch. I found it on I have Amazon Prime, and they've got the one of the versions up there on Amazon Prime. So that's in my watch next list there. Deer Hunter Yeah, Deer Hunter. A lot of people talk about Deer Hunter and in ways in which it overshadows this movie. And Deer Hunter comes out a couple, I want to say a couple years before this. I know Platoon comes out in '86. Um, okay. Anybody else? I got Braveheart, Good Morning Vietnam, of Robin Williams is a good film. That was a passion project by Williams. I believe he agreed to do the genie in Disney because they agreed to let someone agreed to let him do that. Although that might not be right. So Apocalypse Now is a cool, weird movie, and I almost find the documentary about the making of it more engaging than the movie itself. But I like Apocalypse Now a lot. Don't get me wrong. And you got to you got to watch that extended director's cut. Predator. I mean, I would qualify Predator. You could count it. I mean, it can have aliens and still be war. It's one of those like blurry gray areas. But Rambo: First Blood Part Two. That's interesting. Yeah, a lot of people hold that up as being better of a film than the original. Some people say that about Mad Max as well. Glory's a good choice. I've been trying to get Mrs. Professor movies to watch that. Okay. All right. Um, so let's talk about the technophobia for a second. Um, I present to you the cogs in the war machine. Long story short, I think this movie is showing us the potential for humans to make the best weapons, right? Because I do think this movie is concerned with weapons in general, right? But this is not necessarily a war film in my mind. I think Kubrick, while he makes genre films, I think most of his films are about life, and war is an aspect he sees in life, right? It's a part of life. But I think to call this movie maybe a war film, maybe it's more than that. Maybe it's bigger than that. But the technology in it really comes to the forefront. I recut a trailer recently. It's somewhere on the internet. I'll remind you later, I guess. But I recut a trailer where I took clips from this and I tried to say this was like a love story between Private Pyle and his rifle. Um, and it wasn't that hard to do. I'm not gonna lie. So there's definitely something there going on with the glorification or worship of weaponry, and the parallels between us and the tools that we use, right? Specifically weapons. It also goes a step further and maybe makes the claim that we ourselves or soldiers are also just a tool that gets used. So the paradox of technology is as technology advances and weaponry becomes more advanced, you would think that this would lead to less war, more effective warfare, war quicker, wars over faster. But instead, we have the opposite effect. Not only are weapons becoming more destructive, the tendency and the outbreak of war seems to be happening at an accelerated rate as well. And what kind of happens is war, right? We talk about the like war economy or the war machine. And right, we really do see that if you look at recent history, like war functioning as a machine. And then the human components of that machine just being parts of a bigger industry. And Kubrick really goes to try to show us this through his use of symbolism and objectification. He turns the characters in the movie into objects, and that begins right from the get-go. We're going to strip away their humanity and make them killers, right? We're going to make them Marines. We're going to make them something else. And with that, right, several parallels start to get set up. Soldiers are the full metal jackets. They're the bullets. And the bullets themselves, right? A full metal jacket is a more humane type of ammunition. It's not meant to break up inside a target like a hollow point bullet will, and some other types. It's meant to stay together and pass cleanly through something, being more humane and hopefully being less critical of a damage of a wound. But what that allows, like again, there's a paradox there. There's a contradiction inherent in that, like more humane warfare, right? We're going to kill people in a more humane way. There's an irony to that that Kubrick sees that I think he's really trying to show us. So the military itself is this weapon that is firing these soldiers at, Vietnam in this case, the people of Vietnam. When talked about war in the film, right, Animal Mother pushes back on what Rafterman says, and he says this war is slaughter. And like we see the senseless violence, we see characters we get introduced and murdered. Like we have no time to connect with many of these people. And then also there's some attention being paid to film, media, reporting, the news in this movie, and that really comes to the surface in the second half. And it's showing us the fantastical or fantasy, the fictitious, almost propaganda elements of what we see on screen when we think about war, when we think we're seeing real war. So what that leads to is this kind of glorification and the worship of violence and the making people kill and function as machines and changing us from, Leonard Lawrence to, Gomer Pyle, the killer, right? Something is lost along the way, and maybe it's the humanity. And I think over the course of the movie, Joker is encountering people who, like, he's seen them losing their humanity. They've lost it, many of them. He kind of wants to protect Rafterman from losing his. And as much as Joker says he wants to get a kill and, needs to get back into it, you feel like the whole course of the movie is trying to see Joker hold on to his humanity, not only survive the war, but not become a killer like the drill instructor promised in the beginning. And with that, what that does is it makes the statement that war is this cold, inhumane mechanical system that robs people of the very things that make them human, right? We become programmed like robots, systematized, and there's something unnatural maybe to Kubrick with this. Okay, think about what you think. I like the comments about boot camp as a factory and turning people into machines. I like that a lot. And it's an assembly line, and there's a lot of lines in this movie, like literally in the camera. We talk about the one-point perspective of Kubrick's shots, but even if you look at the image of the soldier standing at attention, right? There's something very like assembly line, systematic. So I like that comment about the factory. That's a cool analogy there. All right. Show of hands. Let's see if we know how to use the raise hand feature. Show of hands if you liked Full Metal Jacket. All right, raise your hand if you liked it. I'm not going to commit anyone to say anything, right? But raise your hand if you like it. And this is maybe, you think of it, maybe it's not your favorite film, right? But you think it's a good film. All right, show of hands. About half of us. Okay. If you haven't found the raise hand feature, if someone wants to type into the chat a helpful solution, but there should be next to, well, I'm not going to say it because I'm not sure right now because my view is a little different from you. Okay, you can put your hands down. Would anyone like to take the follow-up question? So I want you to think about what this movie, if you want to speak to something that's positive and why you like it, I'll give you an opportunity now. And then after that, I want to give someone the opportunity to talk about the weakness or why they don't like this. All right, so raise your hand if you would like to share, right, either how you feel or, right, you want to move on to the next question. But let's see a show of hands for that. In the meantime, I'm going to encourage everyone while we wait. Remember, you can change your name in Zoom, and I encourage you to pick a fun, nickname that maybe Gunnery Sergeant Hartman would have given you. Age, safe for work though, right? Make sure it's appropriate. But yeah. All right, we got any hands? Okay. All right, Ryan, take it away. What do you think?
So as to why, this is or why I like the movie?
Yeah.
I don't know. I just sort of like the way, all the different sides of people it shows, from those who are poorly affected to those who try to keep it together to those who never tried to keep it together in the first place, those who just like killing,
Okay.
To those who, basically just all the types of people that it shows, the people that join the military, the people that are affected by the military, all the different kinds.
Yeah, that's great. It definitely, I think the characters are the strongest piece of this movie. A lot of people are going to celebrate the visuals, right? And I think that's a given with Kubrick. But the characters, we get such a smattering of different, personalities and cultures, and the way war has affected each of them is a little different. Yeah. Okay. All right. Cool. Thanks, Ryan. Fun. Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
No, I thought. Go ahead.
Oh, no, never mind. I was done. Yeah.
Okay. Fun fact about Ryan, guys. Ryan has volunteered. We did a search for an intern, and Ryan's gonna be one of our interns helping us out. The other intern is Blue. But that's a story for another day. But I'd like to both welcome Ryan and to thank him, and you guys should also, maybe thank Ryan because he's gonna help us, not only keep this going but make it even better. And Peter, yeah, let me encourage you. I hope we don't spoil it too much for you, but like, give it a chance. It's one of those Kubricks that like has bled into pop culture in ways that you might not realize until you see it. But it is one of those movies that even without seeing it, you feel like you're like, oh yeah, that guy, the drill instructor guy, I know him. But yeah, sure. Anyone can comment.
Hi, yes. I just wanted to say, like, one of the reasons that or ways in which Full Metal Jacket compared to other Vietnam films, at least in my opinion, I haven't seen every Vietnam film out there, but this was one of the first times I got to see boot camp, and that was unique. Like Good Morning Vietnam was another Vietnam film that stood out because it was different. It was showing a different side of the war, not just the soldiers in battle, but them in different environments. So that's one of the ways that I think that it compares to the other films. It shows this other side, and it shows like that what they went through before they even got into the meat of the battle.
No, that's a good point. As much as people say it's just like every other Vietnam movie that came out around the time, uh, I think this movie like is unique and different, right? Yes, it has the setting of Vietnam partially, but things like you're saying about like Paris Island and even the kind of Vietnam we see are things that are pretty unique to this movie. Oh yeah, it's just like Apocalypse Now, but it's not. Apocalypse Now is in the jungle and on a river for the most of it. This movie like doesn't go into the jungle ever. And that's usually what people associate with Vietnam, right? Even Forrest Gump, like when I think of that, I think of jungles, in the rain, sideways rain, up and down rain, big rain. And I gotta find Bubba. Okay. Anybody else? We got some hands. Well, only because I don't know Private Big Daddy. Please share something. Go ahead. What do you think about this movie?
Private Big Daddy here. Yeah, I was just agreeing. Also, like it feels like the half of the movie with the boot camp. It just kind of it. A lot of the other movies kind of just show boot camp like quickly, or they show like the physical aspects of it, like running through like drills and stuff like that. This shows like the emotional weight of it too, and just how they're actually changing.
Okay.
And so like overall, I feel like this can still be classified as like war movie, but maybe not so much specific to Vietnam. It just
Yeah.
shows like how war in general, from like boot camp to the actual, active duty, like changes certain people, or like the personalities that they become in those
Yeah.
situations. And like they could have been anywhere. They could have been in Korea. They could have been in like, Europe, but like the way that they acted is kind of like universal of war kind of thing. And just like of like how things affect you, and like how some people will see things, through like different lenses, the way like Joker does versus like Animal.
hmm Yeah, and there's a big split between those two characters, and I love their face off in the image on the screen because like it really highlights it. Um, excuse me. I think that's great. This is very much a movie about transformation, and I think that culturally, right, there was a lot of like, because Vietnam's the first Vietnam the movie was the first war to be televised on the TV. Vietnam was the first really widely publicized war, right? It's the first time we're seeing footage in the news and stuff like that. Prior to that, like World War II, I believe like you're getting a lot of propaganda reels before your movies, like support our troops, buy war bonds. But this is Vietnam is when like Walter Cronkite is saying the war's unwinnable, and we're seeing coffins coming back, and we're seeing vets come back, missing legs and arms, and they seem angry, and like maybe culturally, like people this movie helps people understand what the soldiers really do go through and how they end up possibly the way they are, and what the war does to people. So I think, yeah, any of that is possible. I think Forrest Gump, because now I'm on a Forrest Gump kick, does that a little with Lieutenant Dan, but not the same, right? Lieutenant Dan was like, he almost got punished for not being a nice guy. And if you follow the narrative of that movie, no, I know, like the soldiers didn't kill him or chop off his legs, blow up his leg because of that, but like narratively, the people with the script, I feel like Dan gets his comeuppance and then has to like learn how to be a good person once he's lost his legs, right? And he goes through that bitterness, but it doesn't really like pay any attention to the transformative power of war. Okay. Other hands? Anybody else? Lieutenant Dan showed more of the post-war struggles. Yeah, I agree with that. Like Born on the 4th of July, same thing, right? That's a kind of Vietnam vet movie, if I could go so far. Greg, what do you think?
So one of the things I find interesting about Vietnam movies in general, and
Mm-hmm.
this as well, is that there were so many good Vietnam movies that came out that they all kind of fit together as a puzzle. Like war's really complicated, and you probably can't make a movie that captures the entire concept of a war in 2
Yeah.
hours. And so like you get movies that are more granular, like about the actual battles, like Platoon. And then you get movies that are more about like the after effects on soldiers, like Forrest Gump or Born on the 4th of July. I think this movie kind of fits like a bridge between them because it does show the first half about what it does to your psyche,
Mm-hmm.
and it keeps that going into the second half, which is, I mean, there's not too much battle scene like in the sense of Platoon.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, there are a couple of battle scenes and they're really important to the movie in the second half, but it doesn't get bogged down in like a, you know, the tactics and the constant shooting and stuff. It's more about the emotional impact of it. And I think when you
Yeah.
see it as a whole, you get a better picture of what Vietnam was about. But this movie has like a good bridge between movies more about the personal side and about like what the war actually looked like from a war standpoint. This is sort of in the middle, and it
Yeah.
has served
Go
like
ahead.
as a good bridge ground.
No, I think that's a really a good articulate way of like saying that. Um, the look of the movie and like showing people Vietnam, like I think is worth us exploring further, maybe a little later, because like Kubrick's got a style, right? And there's a reason why we think his movies are so beautiful or well shot, well lit, right? Um, but like, why pick war as a topic and do that with your style? Like, it's something I would like us like just back burner for now, right? Because there's almost like a well, we'll talk about it, but there's a almost documentarian style to Kubrick's camera where I forget the camera's there so much more with his movies than some other films. Um, okay, so I said Peter could go next. Peter, do you still want to share?
Oh, yeah. Am I on?
Go ahead. Yeah, you're on.
Yep. Now, this might not be a very good comparison, but it is a war movie, even if it's not a realistic one. It's anyone here seen Starship Troopers?
Yeah, that's actually a good thing to bring up. Show of hands if you've seen Starship Troopers for Peter. Go ahead, keep going.
Well, people say that this film shows the boot camp kind of scenes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I haven't fully seen Starship Troopers, but there are a lot of scenes, I believe, with boot camp in that one.
Yeah.
There too. Like the enemy cannot push a button if you disable his hand. Remember that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he throws
Yeah,
the knife to the guy's hand. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think that's a great point. And when trying to think of a movie that is most similar to Full Metal Jacket, I'm not gonna lie to you, like Starship Troopers is what I think of because in a way it is this movie but in space. And in a way the tone is very similar, and the reception to both movies was similar as well. Where to a lot of people when Starship Troopers came out, they're like, this is they like Idiocracy also is another film not about war, right? But people mistook to think they were glorifying the subject matter when it's actually like a very sarcastic, tongue-in-cheek condemnation of those things. There's an irony in Starship Troopers, you know, that isn't necessarily up in the forefront for people when they first viewed it. But that irony has people have learned to see it and appreciate it. And I think the same could be said with Full Metal Jacket. So yeah, thank you for that comment, Peter. That was a really good parallel to draw between the two films. And seriously, Peter, you gotta watch. You gotta finish these movies. You know, watch all of Starship Troopers. I think it's worth it. Watch this when you have some time. I think it's worth it. I think you'll see like, oh wow, it's like this and this right next to each other. Oh, nice. You got some people saying they got some love for Starship Troopers. I have not seen the sequels. I think that's a Paul Verhoeven. He directed the original RoboCop as well. And again, like all of those movies in tone, like he's a very Kubrickian filmmaker in terms of the tone of a lot of his movies. Um, so yeah, good. I've got windows blocking things. All right, we've kind of covered the how does it compare. So for the sake of time, let's go into our first real topic. We're going to talk about a war film and what is it good for. And this is really kind of my thoughts on representation in general. But we see a lot of waste and excess in this movie. It's violent, right? We see killing. We're horrified by some of it, some of us, depending on your sensibilities. But really, even more so, to me, this movie is less concerned with war and more concerned with like how war has been presented to us, right? How war has been Disneyfied and commercialized and spun and packaged and presented neatly, even in film, right? And I think Kubrick is definitely trying to make us aware and reflective of those thoughts with this movie. And one of the big things I point out, and it doesn't pull me out of the movie for some reason. And this is what I love about Stanley Kubrick is the war reporters, the documentary film, the conversation with the Stars and Stripes people when Act 2 really first starts, right? And Joker's lieutenant, like telling him, Joker, we print two types of stories. Stories where soldiers donate their pay to hungry Vietnamese people, and stories where soldiers kill the enemy. Right? You change your ending, give it a better ending. Right? I think Kubrick is very much interested in that. A lot of people in documentaries and stuff said like Kubrick, if he had a war, he would have been a war reporter, right? He would have been a war photographer probably. So I wonder if we see some of that with this. I mentioned Joker's editor and some of the pressures we see. It borders on propaganda. Maybe I'm using it lightly. Maybe it's just straight up propaganda. And Kubrick's like, look, war reporting are lies. It's fake news. But it's there and it doesn't pull me out, right? If anything, it fits with everything else. It feels natural and organic. It feels real. And that's like the magic of Kubrick's camera. Like you forget it's there. Everything, like you're like there watching it. It's what all movies are supposed to do. But with him, like I feel it so much more than some others. And the news crew. So the other big highlight is when they're interviewing people. We have the tracking shot. We have them going one way. We have the Kubrick's camera going the other. We have them talking about Vietnam, the movie. And we'll let the Vietnamese play the Native Americans. Joker will be John Wayne. You'll be General Custard. So there's again, I think that reference isn't by accident. I think again, Kubrick's trying to point us to some of the parallels with maybe the United States involvement in some wars, but definitely the Vietnam War. The behavior of the soldiers is very different, right? Like, and I mean, maybe Joker's the one who stays the most similar because he's making jokes at everything the whole time, but I think that's a mask he wears. I think that's his defense mechanism, his armor. But like Animal Mother, right? Like is very more well reserved. Rafterman is like, I'm ready to kill. Here's my gun. Here's this, right? He seems more heroic. And then Cowboy is like a stuttering idiot almost, right? He like, this isn't the war that I thought war would be. Here in the city, this is like war, but out there it's not. And some of those other guys come the other way. They say they're my friends, but I don't know, right? Like he's just rambling a little bit, and they're very different on camera. And I think again, Kubrick's trying to draw our attention to that as well. So things to think about. What do you think this is trying to say about war? And also feel free to comment on how the movie is doing it, right? Like we talked a little bit about, I guess, in terms of narrative, right? Showing us boot camp, right, is something that adds maybe to the genre of war film. That's not something we see a lot, right? But something about the structure, you think it's 2 acts, you think it's 3, maybe you want to think the visuals are like very iconic. But yeah, either what do you think this is suggesting? Or how does this movie fit into the larger genre of war films? But what do you think it's saying? So raise your hand if you got some ideas. It's Kubrick, so everything is objective. You can't be wrong. Everything is right. It's your point of view. He's showing you something like, I took a picture. What do you see in the picture? So what do you see in the picture? How is this, saying something about war? What is it trying to say? I've got totally follow-up questions I can do also, if we need. Still, I'm disappointed. We only got one name change. It's all right, guys. It's all right. Private Big Daddy is our only recruit. All right, we've got Greg. All right, Greg, what do you think? Which question you want to answer first?
Well, I guess so. What does it suggest about war?
Sure.
I think it so because this is about technophobia and technology. I guess
Ooh, I
I'll
like
try
it. Go for it.
to. I think that one of the things that struck me about this is that the U.S. was technologically superior to the Vietnamese in this, and I think the most important scene is when they finally catch up with the sniper in the actual battle scene.
Hmm.
And from all the massive amount of technological advantage, you could see from that even the U.S. soldiers realized that the other side, regardless of your technical advantages, they were fighting for their homeland,
Mm-hmm.
and that all kind of dissolved away, and that they were all just kind of it kind of diffused the technological advantage of the Americans, and they realize it when they see that, or
Yeah.
at least some of the soldiers see that you can have all the technical advantage in the world, but war is about heart, not about technology. It
Hmm.
just depends on how long you're willing to fight and how many people you're willing to lose. And in the case of the Vietnamese, they were willing to lose 20 times more than the US or more.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter. The technology sort of dissolves away to war is an actual human effort, and it requires human contact. And you're only as strong as what you're willing to do, how far you're willing to go.
Yeah.
So I
Okay.
think that this movie kind of dissolves that into one single scene. I mean,
Yeah.
they start with turning these soldiers into weapons. It moves into the battlefields, and then it all, you see the scenes with the helicopters where they're killing random people, and it looks like it should be an easy war to win. But when it all gets down to the important scene, it's just really this person was willing to basically kill themselves to take out one soldier or maybe
Yeah.
two, and when the soldiers finally meet up with her and they're standing around her, they realize that there's not much you can do to win a war if this is what the other side's willing to do.
Yeah,
At
that's a
least
good point.
mentally, it kind of takes the steam out of their advantage.
Mm-hmm.
I think this movie illustrates that as good as any of the other movies do.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. Um, Two things I want to say about your comment. The first is it was either Matthew Modine, Vincent D'Onofrio, or Adam Baldwin in an interview said that the sniper scene, right, is the perfect metaphor for what the Vietnam War was, right? You've got this lone Vietnamese teenage girl in a position shooting down American soldiers, helplessly outnumbered, outgunned, outnumbered, and yet she is facing certain death. She is not going to win. She is going to die, but she's going to do it anyway. She's going to hold her ground and, like you said, defend her homeland. And one of those three actors said that, to them, it was the perfect metaphor for what the war was, right, and why the war failed for the United States, right, because you can't beat that, right. One of Rome's downfalls was as they expanded and got so big, they needed bigger armies and stuff, and they started hiring soldiers, mercenaries. And your willingness to fight and risk your life and stuff for money versus love and nationalism, love of country, patriotism, any of that stuff, will usually when the chips are down, right? The mercenaries were the ones who would not fight as hard or would run from battle and retreat before the others. I'm not commenting on the pros or cons of nationalism, right? I'm just noticing that it seems to be stronger than money in terms of being a soldier, definitely. And then yeah, that decision to kill her at the end, right? The Joker wants to put her out of her misery, and that alma mother will only allow it if Joker's the one to do it. There's definitely something going on there. Looking at the chat for a second, definitely something that is often said is about the split in structure. Um, I see it. The duality is really cool too, and I think that's you know what, it's the duality thing is the most on the nose with Kubrick I've ever seen him be. Where it's so just okay, I don't want you to miss it. Here it is. Here's maybe my point, But yeah, that button and the Born to Kill, it's yeah, the symbolism, what he wears is in direct contradiction, paradox. War is a paradox, you know, I guess is going on there as well. All right, Peter, what do you think? You got it? Okay,
Yeah,
go ahead, man.
sorry.
No, that's cool.
I was just piggybacking on what Craig said. At least I think it was Craig.
Sure.
I I think the best way to describe the whole Vietnam thing, the war, is an occupying foreign force, that being the U.S.,
Mm-hmm.
cannot defeat a determined local populace. That's one of the many things. I don't mean to get political here. Last thing I want
Okay.
to do is get political, but
Sure.
that's one of the many things we probably should have learned after that war.
Yeah, that's a great point, right? That like also the cyclical nature of history, it seems like we're making the same mistakes, right? We're not learning any lessons, perhaps, right? Okay, go ahead. All right. Anybody else? You want to talk about the visuals? You want to talk about how beautiful the movie looks? You want to talk about how like you feel like you're there? Okay, go ahead.
One of the things that is consistent through the years of watching this film is not remembering the second half. The first half stands out so much that I barely remember anything from the second half. And watching it again recently, I was like, "Oh yeah, that." But the things that did stand out from the second half was the casual disregard for life. It's like women and children. How do you shoot women and children? And it's easy. You just don't lead them as much. And that was like the one thing that for years has stuck out in my mind. And I'm not sure if that has anything to do with the plot structure or whatever, but like the first half of the movie you cannot erase from your mind, and the second half blurs like everything else with exception of like that one piece for me. So I don't know what that means, but it certainly has an impact. And I think that was like, I feel like it was specifically done. It was meant to be this way where you can't shake the first half.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's a great point. Fun fact about the you don't have to lead him as much actor. He's the doorman, I think is how he's often referred. But that actor, the guy who's hanging out the get some guy, right? The guy who's shooting out of the helicopter. He was originally the actor cast to play Hartman, right? And Lee Ermey was the technical advisor to make sure they just had accuracy and realism in what they were doing for the film. And Lee Ermey basically like swindled himself into the position and took it from this other guy, and he basically had no role. And then Kubrick, like late into filming, had him come back and film those scenes. The actor was very bitter with Kubrick. He saw the movie, and one of his happiest, I guess, what made him feel much better about it was like he gets a name in the opening credits. Like it's pretty up close to the top when we're saying like Matthew Modine, Vincent D'Onofrio, and his name escapes me, right? But that actor also, right? Kubrick, even though he had such a small part, it was almost like Kubrick, almost apologizing for changing his role and then shrinking it so much. The first part of the movie is it's the expectation to me, right? And the second part of the movie, I don't want to say half because to me I don't know if it works like that, but the second part is the reality, right? The expectation versus the reality, and what that's going to do is create irony, perhaps. So, all right, last chance to say what you think this is trying to say about war, or talk about the structure, the plot, or the visuals. Anybody want to weigh in before we switch to our next topic? Going once. All right, Sharon, is that Sharon?
Sorry.
No,
Yeah,
it's okay. Hey, Sharon.
Hi, Kevin.
How are you?
I am good. I think what the movie's trying to say about, suggest about war is that you're trying to shape the soldier into a machine. But every now and again, the humanness comes back. Like you can't hold the humanness down.
Yeah.
So I think that's why I wanted to comment what LMC said.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I think you don't remember the second half, is because that's kind of what happens in war.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like you have to shut yourself down to get through it and
Sure.
do your job. And I think, unfortunately, Vietnam, there were so many casualties. And I think that's why it was a little more difficult for the propaganda, because, people, soldiers were coming home, um, you know, how do I say this?
Go ahead.
My mom told me that in her small town, they were coming, there were so many dead soldiers coming home that the funeral home couldn't handle the amount
Wow.
of soldiers. Like, they were kind of like the coffins were lined up in the funeral home. So that's a small town.
Yeah.
So think about, watching your television and the reality of what's really happening at home. So
Yeah. Go ahead.
I think that's what he was trying to show, that
Mm.
we're trying to make machines out of human beings, but it's a hard thing to do,
Yeah.
because the humanness has to arise at somewhere, somehow. It has to arise. So,
Yeah, and I think that like the humanness, we see it in Joker's desire to like for the mercy killing at the end for the woman who's trying to kill him. Like I don't read it as like it's revenge for her trying to kill him. Like read it as like he sees her suffering and he doesn't want her to be in pain. There's again irony in that because war is pain, war is killing. But like that's like to me that's the heart, right? That's the compassion, the empathy for each other, the ability to recognize that your enemy has more in common with you than is different. Um, and like there's in the Jungian conversation that Joker has, that kind of comes to the surface when he's talking to the colonel or whoever, and it's in the image at the bottom right hand side of your screen. I think it's partially blocked now, but that's what I'm referring to. There's inside every Vietnamese person is an American waiting to get out, and we're gonna free them whether they like it or not. Dorian Haywood's character says, um, it's like they got our freedom and they don't even want it. They'd rather be alive, I guess. Right? Like, yeah, there's something there. Um, there's this tendency to try to empathize or relate, right? And whenever you see people trying to do it, it kind of gets squashed by either the character themselves or another character. So it's yeah, the systemization of war, the weaponization of the human being. Um, you lose something, right? And it's going to have terrible effects. We may not have lost a generation with the Vietnam War, but more than a generation was impacted by it, right? Like the number of U.S. casualties could be lower than it was, and it would still have had ramifications throughout our culture and our history. Okay, and it very well could be like the fog of war or a defense mechanism, right? The only way you get through it is not to think about it, right? That's a quote from like one of the early episodes of Rick and Morty. I want to say the pilot. They're running away from something weird, and he's like, "What? Blah 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 blah," and he's like, "The answer is don't think about it, Morty. All right, just keep going." And yeah, that might be how a lot of these characters and real soldiers make it through. You know, that killer instinct, right? What do we actually mean by that? All right, very nice. Let's, for the sake of time, let's keep it going. Joker's duality, because I think we're gonna say we're getting close. He says they don't want, so we're gonna talk about masculinity, transformation, and duality. Joker says the Marine Corps doesn't want robots. Hartman tells us that the Marine Corps is gonna turn them into killers. Joker, by the end of the movie, seems to endorse this idea, right? I have lost my fear. Yes, I'm in a terrible situation, but I am alive and I am not afraid. Like, and it's said almost like triumphantly, right? He has become the thing that the first half of the movie promised to turn him into, right? He has the 1,000-yard stare. He's changed, right? Um, And I think what we see is men leaving behind their humanity and their identity. It gets stripped away, and like we were saying before, don't think about it. We see them, like the Crazy Earl character, become these like unthinking destroyers, right? Animal Mother is the worst character, but also he's the only character who cares about you if you get injured. He's the only guy who's going to go back for you if you get left behind. And there's something very true and honest about that as well. His only problem is, he needs someone to be throwing grenades at him the rest of his life, and then he'll be your best friend forever. And then finally, right, we see them become, maybe, depending on how you view it, survivors or monsters, right? So depending on how you view this movie, because the movie's not going to tell you how to feel, you're going to be left with, how do I feel about them? Do I view them as, well, they made it through and they survived? Or do I view it as, well, they've lost everything that made them who they were and they're monsters now? Right? There's many ways you can view this film, but I think the open-endedness of the ending like really makes you question how you feel about the characters that you've gotten to know, specifically Joker. We got 9 minutes. All right. Right? True, Mrs. Professor Movies, at 8 o'clock we have till? All right. So, anybody see anything here? I'll entertain it for 3 more minutes before I change the slide. Anybody see anything here? Maybe you want to talk to me about why Private Pile's story is there. Maybe you want to say something about what this is saying about men. Maybe you want to say something about the characters themselves. But if you'd like to raise your hand, and I'll give you 2.5 more minutes. All right, Private Big Daddy, take it away. Greg, you're after him, and I have room for one more if someone wants to weigh in after that. Private Big Daddy, take it away, sir.
Yeah, I just felt like with Private Pile, it just kind of showed like between some of the other soldiers there, especially Joker, Pile, and like Cowboy, shows like there were people that like can make it fine. There's people that kind of like get by. Like I feel like Joker kind of like applies like to the situation and he does what he can, and then like Pile he's just not cut out for it, and it just affects him too far. And I find that it's pretty interesting after rewatching it that the end of that first half is Private Pile saying like he's in a world of shit or whatever, and then Joker says the exact same line at the end, but adds that, like you said before, the but I'm alive. It's like and like one's like the death and one's alive, and it's just I feel like that kind of plays with that like survival aspect.
Absolutely. And I think that fits with what I was saying before about like what are you willing to give up and what are you going to compromise to survive. In my high school freshman, right, our first unit is about the cost of survival, and we explore that in like several different ways, where once it's like a guy trapped under rocks and like should he pay the cost that it takes for like the police or whoever to dig him out. And another is like, looking at the life of Pi, right? What's the cost of surviving, et cetera, and et cetera. No, but that's great. And we see that, right? Joker survives. I would imagine that if Pyle didn't die, didn't kill himself, the character, he probably would have become his Animal Mother, though. As hard as to believe as that might sound, that to me is the trajectory Pyle's on before, the end of the first half. Okay, I said Greg could go next. Greg, what do you think? What do you want to talk about?
So I guess what I was going to say was somewhat related. Private Pyle's almost, along with Joker, the main character of the first half. Yeah. And he's not even in the second half of the movie for obvious reasons. And I think that what he does is you remember him throughout the second half of the movie because you just finished watching the first half.
Yeah.
That he serves as sort of like a foil for like what everyone there went through just to be in the capacity to be in a war. The guys show up in a condition not ready for it, and the amount of stress they have to go under, like to get them prepared for war under the drill sergeant, is so much so that some people don't even survive that part. And you remember that's the starting point for all the guys in the next role. Those are people who were able to survive it, and he serves as sort of like the foil for like letting you know that people don't survive it, I guess.
Yeah.
To highlight like how difficult the soldiers have and why they start to develop the crazy survival personalities that they need to get through it. And I think without him in the first half of the movie, you wouldn't understand why the people have the certain craziness or defense mechanisms that they use in the second half. You know, like Joker laughing about everything during the war scenes, like the crazy guy saying like, get some, like they're all just trying to survive. And if it comes out of nowhere rather than comes out of something like seeing it against what happened to Private Pile, it gives it more, you get more understanding for why the characters are the way they are rather than sort of seeing it in abstract. When you see it usually in a war movie, you don't see the first half, you don't see the death of somebody just in training. And so sometimes you get confused as to why the characters are so jaded the way they are from the very beginning of the war. But in this one, it helps lead you into understanding why the characters are who they are later.
Okay. I think that's a good point. Wait, I had a thought. Let me see if it comes back to me. Okay, for sake of time, Private Big Daddy, let me see if I can collect my thoughts. What you got?
Like I saw the movie a long time ago, and one thing that just kind of stood out with me, and I think it's interesting that it also happens at the very end of the movie too, is just like the way that like Animal is just kind of like talking about the sniper and just like saying like, let her rot, she killed, you know, all these people or whatever. And it's just like everybody just kind of like forgets for a second that it's just like it's a war and it's both sides, and they were just like killing a whole bunch of other people on the Vietnam side. So it's like there's this almost like forgetting that, you know, I don't know, it's kind of like that like machine kind of thing, and the way that the heads and sergeants and stuff like were telling them just like, oh, you know, we're the good guys, they're the bad guys. And it's just, you kind of forget that, and it just like leaves that with you at the end of the movie with just this like bad taste in your mouth. And it just, I thought that was a interesting thing that like throughout this whole time, this is what the characters are like kind of showing you.
Yeah, because you see that like everything Joker's kind of learned in training, none of it was applicable really. None of it like mattered. He got to a war that was very different than he had been prepared for. And that's kind of what Cowboy is talking about to the reporters. He's basically like, everything they said this was going to be, it isn't. You know, the other thing I was going to say before with Greg's comment, and then I like lost my train of thought, was when thinking about it, right? Like with Pyle's death and stuff, like, again, like nobody has to actually answer this, but who would you rather be, Pyle or Cowboy, right? Because both of them die, right? Which is worse, right? Did Pyle get off easy by dying before getting to war, right? Did Cowboy suffer more because he got through boot camp and all that other stuff, and still they both end up in the same place, dead, right? It's something to consider, right? Because we do see characters given to us, and we don't even get time to care about many of them. But Cowboy is one that like we get from the beginning, and he's the only character really between, let's say, Pyle, Joker, and Cowboy. Those are the only three that like I think like we remember when we think of the beginning, right? And then Cowboy dies, and Joker's got no jokes at the end of the movie, right? He's one of them. He's marching along with them. And there's something there with that too, right? He's one of the boys by the end, right? Because he's got that kill. All right. Anybody else? Anyone want to touch on Carl Jung? Maybe you've read his infamous Red Book. Nobody knows if that's real or not. I don't think. Actually, it may. I don't know. But there's a book called the Red Book that Carl Jung wrote. Look into it. It's weird. Anybody else? Maybe, right? I'm reading the comments about like not knowing, not having time to get to know people, and it's true. One of my favorite books about the Vietnam War is The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien. I read it with my 10th graders often when we do American literature, and it's a very Full Metal Jacket kind of book. So if you like this movie or Vietnam or war genre, I recommend Things They Carried if you haven't read it, because it is also very much I think this is a movie about war movies in some level. It's a movie about movies. Things They Carried is a war book about war books or about storytelling, right? It's very much interested in how we talk about war and what we carry with us into and out of war, both physically and metaphorically. Yeah, right. Like Mickey's point about like if you're gonna die, why suffer, right? And that's Joker's point at the end of the movie too, with the sniper girl, right? Like, yeah, she's gonna die. Many of the Vietnamese enemy are going to die, but maybe we should give her a quick death instead of, you know, letting her suffer in so much pain. And right, coming off of how we ended warfare last time in the Pacific, right, with nuclear weaponry. Again, I'm not defending the use of nuclear weaponry, but that was done to quickly end that combat, right? That was done officially, right, to not prolong the Pacific combat and basically end the war, and effectively it did that. Vietnam is the opposite, right? We don't use nuclear weapons. Yes, I know the Cold War. We talked about Doctor Strangelove. I know what happens if we use them, right? But like the war is like World War One more than World War Two, right? The Vietnam War is, people would argue, right? It's the trench warfare. It's the no man's land, right? Like maybe, right? Okay. Anybody else? Why die after if you could die before war? Is it? I mean, again, it's up in the air. All right, Kubrick's quotes. So again, I never know what Kubrick's trying to do, and maybe he's not trying to do anything. But here's some things Kubrick said when interviewed about this movie, and maybe that helps us get closer to what he's thinking of. And this will be the last thing I leave you with. I'll give us a chance to make final comments, and then we're going to wrap up because we're starting to just get around the 1 hour mark. So with this film, Kubrick said his main concern was showing things the way they are. He was very much concerned with the way things are. And again, he doesn't elaborate more on that, but like, again, to me, this fits with the stuff we've been saying about like how this film represents how this accurately represents maybe the experience of war in ways that other movies don't quite grasp as well. Another thing is, and this kind of fit in with, I want to say this was Peter, a comment Peter made earlier. It reminded me of this Kubrick quote. I think it was right when Peter, where you were saying like, I don't want to get political. This is what that kind of reminded me of. So Kubrick said, right, when thinking of history, the great nations have always acted like gangsters, and the small nation always like prostitutes, right? So he's making the association with the United States and Russia and Soviet Union, whatever, as these gangsters who manipulate and control and abuse the smaller countries who, right, go along with it also, right, who are part of it, right, as like being a prostitute, right, they've put themselves into that situation somehow in some way. And again, right, like this is a quote, and I don't know what he really meant, so you guys can totally think about what you think that means. He also, right, he thinks the screen is magic, right, figuratively, but he thinks it's got the power to make you care about things. It's got the power to show you feelings, right? Show feelings. And we didn't figure out how to show feelings until like the mid 2000s with like emojis and stuff. Like that's we figured out, oh, okay, we happy face, sad face, right? We're showing feelings. But Kubrick, right, his movies are like are paintings that convey such emotion. And he makes the claim that no other medium can do it. And finally, he said that like to him, right, the purpose of making movies at all, right? Because this is why, because somebody said the movie had a very cynical ending, a very mean-spirited ending. And Kubrick said, though in vast darkness, right, we must supply our own light. So on one level, I think he's speaking about like his work with this film and how he's trying to illuminate something in the cloud or haze of war, that murkiness. But I also think he's encouraging us as the audience to reflect on how we feel and what we think and what we're seeing with his movie, right? And try to illuminate it ourselves. Try to take something that to him is very subjective, right? And try to put it in what that means for who we are. How you feel about this, because again, right, everyone is going to feel differently. Everyone is going to get something different from this movie. It's nuanced. All right, let's do our final question as, all right, here we go. Hot topic. Do you think war movies like this have good or bad effects on us, the people who watch them? All right, I think we can hear from maybe three, if we've got three people, and then we're going to wrap up. So final thoughts, are war movies like this good for us? Is it good that we consume it? Is it making us more violent? Is this why we have violence in this country, right? Because we've consumed violence for decades. What do we think? What do we think? I see a hand with Greg. All right, Greg, what do you think? And anyone who feels like you have to go, please go ahead. Thank you. But Greg, what do you think? Greg, you're unmuted.
Sorry. What I was going to say was generally it seems like they have a positive effect because they help illustrate that, like, I guess before war movies and like World War I, there was zero concept of what it was like to be in a war as a citizen voting for a war.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that as movies got better and more accurate over time and closer to realistic portrayals of war and how horrible it is, it's had an impact on reducing the size and scope of wars. There are more wars now, but they're not like World War I or World War II. They keep and Vietnam was probably the last major world conflict. I mean, that had that scope and duration and amount of firepower used up until the Iraq War.
Yeah, that was my thought. Maybe Iraq.
Iraq was
similar, especially
Iraq,
in terms of some of the nationalism that led to it, but also some of the criticism it received.
It ended the draft.
Yeah, that's true. You're right.
I mean, the Vietnam War brought about a point where they realized that the draftees. I mean, and you mentioned it before with like the what's it called? People, the mercenaries who didn't fight as hard. And I think Vietnam showed that as war was going further and further, the concept of a draftee just wasn't an effective use. They were too demoralized too quickly. They weren't really in it or wanted to be there. They were just trying to survive. And, so war movies have had some sort of a positive effect in at least illustrating what war is to people who at least here vote for the government that sends people to war or not. So I guess in that respect, they have that positive effect on society in general.
I see similarly that as well when I view it, right? Like you see more people questioning the value or the legitimacy of conflict to this scale, intervention to this scale, involvement. Okay, yeah, no, that's really good. Anyone else? Final thought? Good or bad? Positive? Sharon, you said, wow, prostitutes? That is what Kubrick said. That's not my thought. Okay. I'm gonna look at the comment right now. Let's see what Mickey's thought was. They showed a part of what is happening to the world that otherwise you wouldn't have access to, and that can help you feel empathy and gratefulness for your situation. Absolutely. I think that's kind of similarly what Greg was saying. I think that fits nicely there. You empathize with the enemy more, not only the soldiers, because again, right, Vietnam soldiers were coming back not to parades, right? They're coming back and, again, I don't know how much of an exaggeration it was, but they were not necessarily felt appreciated or welcomed home. And I think that, this helps us who are removed from that situation and empathize with the people from our country who went through it. But I also think it helps us and soldiers empathize with the enemy, the idea that it's more similar than different. And again, right, if I could settle wars, it would be like they do in the movie Troy, where they pick the two best guys and they have them fight, and whoever wins wins. Or maybe we have the two leaders of the two countries box or something, and whoever wins wins. But I don't know why often people don't make the decision to go to the war, it seems, and yet they are the ones who fight. And that's, I don't think that's anything new. Hot Shots, best war movie. That's great. I like it. We also have to be careful and responsible. Yeah, that's important, right? And I think that's true in anything where I'm thinking about what's this saying about technology, right? Again, let's make the Frankenstein reference today, right? In the movie Frankenstein, right? It's really a movie about be careful. And Jurassic Park, right? Be careful what you do, because once you open the bottle, you can't put the genie back in it. And yeah, be conscious of the effects. All right, I'm getting the flashing lights that we are about to be kicked out of the theater, so I am going to wrap us up. So first of all, I'd like to thank you all for being a part of it. I know that the Zoom classes have been a interesting learning curve for all of us. These are strange times, but I appreciate you guys finding the time on this Friday night in your busy schedules to check in with us, because I am super lonely and miss seeing you guys. So I hope that we can meet together, hopefully in the future for our third season. With that said, I'm going to talk about the December movie in a second. But beforehand, I'm going to do some shameless plugs. I talked to you earlier about us looking for interns and things like that. And one of the things I really want to do is find a way to produce more, outside of just our time we spend together, things that, you can think about or see, and can help spur conversation in this. So there's content that we're trying to put out, and we're trying to develop a system in which to do that, especially in the strangeness of these times. So like, again, we've got a Professor Movies, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. We did a summary video of the movie. I made a fake trailer for the movie. The other intern, who's not Ryan, sung a pretty dumb song about the movie. And if any of that stuff sounds appealing, tell your friends. Again, like I'm not gonna say go watch this class on YouTube because you were in the class. You should tell your friends to go watch the class that you were in on YouTube. Maybe, I don't know. It doesn't matter to me. I enjoy our time together. With that said, our next class will be December 4th. And if you look in the chat, there's the YouTube link. And thank you, Sharon. I'm glad that you missed me. Like I said, I miss all of you guys. All right, so I'm just gonna spoil it right now because I know you're all really excited to do Barry Lyndon, right? Because that's everybody's favorite Kubrick movie. It's obviously the one that's most about technology. So, right, we're jazzed for Barry Lyndon, I hope. Show of hands if you're jazzed for Barry Lyndon. Okay, 2 hands. All right, 3 hands. Now I feel like some of you are lying. Everett, you don't know what Barry Lyndon is. You just want me to feel okay. Well, that's less than half, so you know what? Like, let's not do Barry Lyndon then. Okay, so December 4th, let's talk about the obvious 2001: A Space Odyssey. Buckle up. It's a long, slow movie. Feel free to, and I'm not going to say watch it at 1.5 speed, but if you find it too slow, consider speeding up the slow parts where nothing's happening, but it's beautiful. So maybe don't consider doing that. Thank you all for joining us. This has been Talking Technophobia. I've been Professor Movies, and you guys have been great. I hope to see you guys next time. And finally, I got your emails, so check your emails because I'm going to send you things like, hey, what do you want to do in season 3 and stuff? Help me pick something. Let's give me ideas. Because again, like maybe Fridays aren't the best day. Let's start talking about that because since it's us, let's make it work for all of us, right? And make it as good as we can, and enjoyable for all of us. So once again, thank you and good night. Start watching 2001: A Space Odyssey. I will see you guys later. And now I'm just rambling. All right, so I'm gonna go till Dina kicks me off. I like that. That's good. The original ending of the movie was hi Sharon. The original ending of the movie, Animal Mother cuts off the sniper's head and they kick it as a soccer ball during the march scene at the end, and that got obviously cut from the film, but that definitely would have put a lot more gruesome of a spin at the end. And that's my last fun fact for you. All right, guys, I'll see you later, all right? I don't want to take up any more of your time. It's been wonderful. It's been a pleasure. Take care and be well.